so wonderful to be here. Thanks for joining us today on this Saturday morning. I am the Associate Director for Community Outreach and Engagement at the Robert H. Lurie Comprehensive Cancer Center down the street at Northwestern Medicine. And I'm also the Director for the Center for Health Equity Transformation. But I also am, very importantly, an OBGYN at Northwestern. So I get to catch babies, which is one of the most fabulous jobs on earth, in my opinion. Now, I have been a scientist for a while now. I've been in Chicago on the ground since I was a college student at U Chicago, since the early 90s. And over the years, it has been critically important to really see the evolution of research and the impact on communities through research, but also the important points about why people won't participate in research. So I'm going to just help give us the overview for this session today. You know, it is clear that we in the United States of America have had a deep and long history of slavery, racism, and discrimination, and that extends through research. Very famous, terrible, egregious studies with Tuskegee and Henrietta Lacks at Hopkins, and just so many others. Puerto Rico with the birth control pills trials in the mid-1950s, and hysterectomies against people's will with INS. So again, we in healthcare and in science have earned distrust of people, and we have to work really hard to earn that trust back. It feels like there are two different cliffs when we talk about healthcare and outcomes, and research is really meant to help improve healthcare delivery and outcomes and treatment accessibility and availability and appropriate treatments for a variety of things, whether it's diabetes, asthma, cancer, or COVID. But again, there's these two different cliffs, and why are the green people in this picture starting at a place near the edge of the cliff, and they don't have the advantages of a fence to help prevent them from falling off a cliff, or a safety net to help them in case they go through the fence, or an ambulance that works and doesn't have a pop tire, or a GPS that's broken and that there's gas in the tank. You know, systemic racism is pervasive, both through healthcare delivery, medicine, and in science. And you know, we need to work actively. And when I say we, it's the leadership, it's all the physicians, it's the healthcare workers, it's the scientists for sure that are driving these innovations that need, and healthcare delivery approaches and healthcare delivery period, to really help make these two different cliffs to be one cliff for everybody, right? And what that means then is what goes into things is what you get out of things, right? It's a very simple equation. We have all learned this in some way, shape, or form. In the research world, whatever the research questions that we formulate, the people who participate in the research projects, the samples, the biospecimens, the blood, the pieces of tissue that get taken to the bench then are what's used to then make the science, the experiments. And so if the experiments don't have tissue from diverse persons, or blood from diverse persons, or diverse persons participating in that research, then the research is not necessarily relevant to diverse persons, right? So the relevance of the research is only as good as who's participating in that research in the first place. And it's only as good as the relevance of the questions being asked of that research project or clinical trial in the first place. So that's why it's so important to have diverse people participate in all aspects of research. Now, the late Congressman John Lewis, looking under the hood of the car, it's so essential to think about that. And that's why it's critical to have community partners and organizations and diverse people with varying backgrounds and lenses and viewpoints to participate in all aspects of trials and research, because that's what makes that engine scrutinized better so that that car ultimately goes better, right? It functions better, it sustains, it's not going to be, thrown out or traded in a year. It's going to work for everybody and not just one person or population. So here's that research pipeline I was talking about. So there's a lot of things that go into creating a research project or a clinical trial, like for the COVID vaccine, for example. It starts with the funder on the left-hand side of the screen. Right. And we understand in this country, right, scientists know that our demography of this country is evolving. And in about 20 years, it's actually going to be even more diverse than it is now. And that is a critical point, because 20 years is not that long from now. And in 2 decades, it usually takes a decade to a decade and a half for a clinical trial result to actually get into clinical practice. So if you think about it that way, 10 to 15 years for new clinical trials that are being released and published now to actually get into and infiltrate clinical care from now. And by then, 15 years from now, you're already going to be having a more diverse population in this country. So whatever trials that are coming out right now, if they don't have diverse participants, how applicable are those clinical care changes that are going to be made when there's going to be more diverse people 10, 15 years down the line from now? So I hope you're following me with this. That's why this is such an important topic and so important for everybody to understand and know. And it's not only about the funder, it's about the funding opportunity, because the funder, whether it's a foundation or the National Institutes of Health or a government agency or a PCORI or anything else, that funding opportunity basically tells the scientists or the people that are writing that grant what they need to include and how they need to write it. So if the funding opportunity says you need to include diverse participants or community partners, then the scientist or the team that is writing for that particular grant wants that grant. So that they will then follow that requirement. And it's sad to think that we have to have funding opportunities that actually require those things, but intentionality is really critical at this point in our history and with our evolving demography and the importance of making sure that communities are included and people and populations are included in research and have that opportunity to participate and weigh in and help get us to better healthcare improvements and treatments so that we can actually decrease the burden of disease across our communities. Who's on the research team? So that very bold square. Who made a scientist? What does a scientist look like? Who gets to be a scientist? Who gets to be in the high level universities? How did I get to be a scientist at Northwestern, right? That whole pipeline is really critical, and fostering a diverse workforce, helping our students. A lot of my programs at Northwestern in our Center for Health Equity, it helps open pathways and opportunities for students to see that scientists don't look like one particular person, that there are many diverse backgrounds and that there are many opportunities in healthcare and in science. And it is a possibility, a real true possibility. The study protocol and participants, all of those things matter to how we evolve research that is inclusive, that is not actively excluding certain participants or people. So some of the things about what we're doing at a national level. So I serve on national level committees to help in clinical trial, what they call cooperative groups. So it's groups of institutions across the community that are across the United States of America that have different sites open for clinical trials. And so we're talking about data review and concept development and protocol development and all of the reviews that happen at every step of the way. And so what we're working on is not only on the teams and the scientists that need to learn how to develop protocols that include people more than exclude people, but also how reviewers review those protocols and concepts so that they can actually help guide this process. So we're working on both sides of that coin with patient advocates and community organizations nationally. Even in the protocols for recruitment and retention, sometimes our recruitment plans exclude certain populations just by having multiple visits. That's very onerous on some people. Especially if you live in more rural areas, for example. Data analysis, how we analyze data and how we present it and how we disseminate those results are all critical to research. And then again, community engagement and partnership throughout the entire process is critical, and workforce and investigative development is important. So one example of something that we're doing on the ground here that you may have heard of is the Chicago Cancer Health Equity Collaborative. And again, this is a partnership across Northwestern, University of Illinois at Chicago, UI Cancer Center, and Northeastern Illinois University. We have multiple healthcare, health equity scholar research programs to help opportunities for college students and Chicago City College, community college students across the city. They come into our team for a full-time program. They get paid for the summer, and then they go on to different opportunities in labs and research teams across the city so that they can learn in stages and help build that pipeline towards more diverse people in science and healthcare. We also have research that goes across these institutions, partnered with communities, and it's all focused on cancer health disparities. And then we report back in a variety of ways to communities across Chicago. And if you're interested, we have a website that helps guide you to different sessions that we have throughout the year. We also have a community scientist team that we're working with at Lurie Cancer Center at Northwestern that is helping to develop more accessible tools and approaches, not only for researchers, but also for community members around cancer health education and prevention and things like that. So stay tuned with that work. And finally, you're going to hear a little bit more from my partners that are going to be speaking later today, Rabia, Maggie, and our Health for All. And this has been a wonderful partnership with Chicago Public Libraries and with the Chicago Department of Public Health. This is a website that we have created. It's called healthforallproject.org. And it's basically different vignettes and videos and information about clinical trial participation. What are your rights as a participant? What does that mean? What is it? What is a clinical trial? All of those things are on this website to make it easy. And this is a labor of love. It took about 10 years of testing this in different communities across the country, different backgrounds, et cetera. And really, this is a culmination of that. So it's a good tool. We've worked with the Chicago Public Libraries and librarians to develop it. And hopefully you can use it and give us feedback about it. Our window of opportunity is now, as we move forward from this pandemic. This is the time. This is the time to push this topic. This is the time to avail clinical trials to everyone, because we know, especially in the cancer world, we know that when you have access to a clinical trial and you have a particular cancer, you might have an increased opportunity of having a state-of-the-art treatment that actually helps improve your lifespan and your quality of life, more importantly. So it is now that we try very hard and work very hard at improving opportunities to participate in trials. But we need to be strategic and intentional, and we have to go beyond trainings and modules for scientists about discrimination and things like that. We have to be more intentional, as I said earlier, about how we do this and how we make sure that we build the trust that we have really instilled problems with earlier in research and in science, and we really have to work hard to build it back. Thank you so much. This is how you can contact me and my team, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Simon. The next person we'll hear from is Dr. Kelly. Okay, I don't want to mispronounce the name. Dr. Kelly Nnorom. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. He will discuss the ins and outs of clinical trial participation.
We'll get started. I'd like to give special thanks to Margaret Nevins for helping provide some of the slides here, and also Gabriela Ramos for also helping provide some of the content in this presentation. So what is the Lurie Cancer Center Comprehensive Cancer Center? So here at the Robert H. Lurie Comprehensive Cancer Center, we are one of 51 in the country. And what that specifically means is that we are designated to do scientific research and to do that in a substantial transdisciplinary way. At the Lurie Cancer Center, every 5 years, we have to submit a competitive renewal to be part of this. And so it's quite involved, and it gets more detailed. So what I'll do is I'll kind of go through the structure of our cancer center, okay? We have 366 members. There are 8 established programs that conduct and support basic translational, clinical, and cancer prevention and control research. There are 14 resources that are available to team members here. These include things like the hematologic malignancies, shared resources like developmental therapeutics, and also trial office. So just a little bit of oversight of the Lurie Cancer Center. Basically what we have is a set of 14 disease teams. And these disease teams will meet on a regular basis to review potential studies. They'll meet monthly usually, and they can reject, endorse trials. And this is kind of like the first level of peer review. From there, a trial will go through a scientific review committee. This is a multidisciplinary committee. They meet twice a month, and they can ask for changes to a trial. They can approve or deny a trial. This is a second level peer review, and this is also required by the National Cancer Institute. And then we also have investigational review boards. These are boards that oversee our cancer center research. And so I like to think of them as patient advocates. These are people that will ensure that patient safety is kept paramount. These are also independent organizations that can oversee the research and can help with corrective action if it's necessary. And then we also have data safety monitoring committees. These include MDs, pharmacists, PhDs, and they meet monthly. And they're also responsible for data and safety monitoring as well as protocol compliance on an ongoing basis. So what's an interventional clinical trial? Well, in a clinical trial, participants receive specific interventions according to the research plan or protocol created by the investigators. These interventions may be medical products, such as drugs. They can be devices, procedures, or changes to a participant's behavior or diet. In order to study an investigational product in humans, a request must be made, and approval to the FDA by the FDA is required for this to proceed. Investigational new drugs are an example of things that require this type of procedure, and investigational device exemptions as well. So, phases of the clinical trial. What's the goal? Clinical trials proceed in a systematic approach. The first phase of which, phase 1, formerly known as phase 0, is an exploratory phase where the exploratory trials conducted before the traditional clinical phase 1 trials will be to look at whether a drug affects the body. They involve very limited human exposure to the drug and have therapeutic or diagnostic goals, for example, screening studies or microdose studies. Phase 1 trials of clinical research focus on the safety of the drug. The goal is to determine the drug's most frequent and serious adverse events, and often how the drug is broken down and excreted in the body. These trials usually involve a small number of participants. As we move through the phases and get through to phase 3, by this point of clinical trials, the research that is gathered is more intensive and is about the drug's safety and effectiveness, but also studies the different populations and different dosages that would be effective for a particular condition. And by using the drug in combination with other drugs, they look and see how efficacious the investigational product is compared to traditional market drugs. So you can kind of see through this diagram what it looks like as we move through the phases of a clinical trial. By the time we get to phase 4 of a clinical trial, we're looking to kind of describe the post-market effects of that drug. This is after a drug has been approved by the FDA. You might see it on TV advertised, but the trial is still ongoing. We're still collecting data. We're still trying to see if there are any things that we might have missed during the first 3 phases of the clinical trial. So what type of trials do we have at the Cancer Center? Well, as a clinical coordinator here, this kind of applies more to my day-to-day. We have 3 basic types of trials that we usually have for our patients. We have industry trials. So these are trials where the drug comes from one of the sponsors, one of the drug companies. We also have investigator-initiated trials. These type of trials would be those that are initiated by physicians, whether it be here at Northwestern or sometimes at other sites. And then we have external investigator trials. So these would be the same idea, just initiated outside of Northwestern. So how do people find clinical trials? How, as a patient, would you be a part of one of these trials? Well, clinicaltrial.gov is an excellent resource. You can go on that website and you can actually search based off of your disease condition, or you can look up different terms. So for example, you might look up arthritis, or you might look up knee pain. And so these type of things can be used, or this type of web search can be used to look for a clinical trial that's happening near you. Now, once you find a clinical trial, what do you think is going to happen? What happens to the actual patient during this time? Well, there are several national and international regulatory guidelines that kind of guide how these trials should be conducted. We're required to follow these and to conduct a clinical trial on human subjects. We don't just go and kind of do what we want. There are a set of guidelines that we follow. These are very important to know and understand why we do these things. We spoke a little bit earlier about some of the history of really adverse type of trials using unethical procedures like in Tuskegee. And so we now look at these clinical trials from the patient's standpoint. What is safe for the patient, and how can we do everything in our power to protect the patient? So there are different things. For example, the International Conference of Harmonization. It's an international body that defines standards that should be used regardless of which country you're in for these clinical trials. Now, how do we conduct these clinical trials from a regulatory standpoint? There are a lot of regulatory considerations that we have to take into account. The FDA code for or the FDA Code of Federal Regulations for Clinical Trials, also known as the Common Rule, specifies specific things that help regulate trials and ultimately help protect patients. These include things like how we should maintain electronic records, how we should have financial disclosures if a doctor has any financial interest in the drug beforehand, how these things have to be taken into account. They also describe the Investigational Review Board and the type of things that they are responsible for, and how we apply for drugs for FDA approval as well. So let's talk about the who when it comes to conducting clinical trials. We have to have proper oversight, and in order to do that, there are multiple branches of bodies that actually take care of this. Bottom corner, we have the FDA, and they're kind of like the eyes on everything. They make sure that there are safeguards for public health by ensuring that new and current medical products are safe and effective. On the other hand, we have kind of more locally an institutional review board. These IRBs review and approve the new drug trials that we have. And then while those trials are being conducted, the IRBs are also responsible for making any modifications and approving or disapproving any of the modifications to these trials. And this is always patient focused. What is in the best interest of the patient and how we can maintain that patient safety. We also look at the principal investigator, or this would be like the doctor that is treating the patient at the time. They're also responsible for oversight during clinical trials. They have to delegate tasks to qualified individuals. They have to ensure that the protocol for any specific trial is being looked at and being followed with integrity. And then we also have the trial sponsor. So these are the drug companies. And the drug companies themselves do quality control and will oversee any little site problems or deviations from the protocol as they occur. So there are different eyes that are looking at patient safety. And this is how we conduct clinical trials in a way that is patient-focused right now. So as you can see, we have different groups that will look at the patient safety. It's not only the FDA, we have audits from the FDA, we have internal monitoring that we do, and we have protocols and procedures that we would also adhere to, like HIPAA. For resources while people are on clinical trials, at the Cancer Center, there are multiple resources that people can rely on. It's not just a matter of coming in to get treatment. There are other considerations as well. Outpatient social work referrals can be extremely helpful. They can help families and patients connect to resources both within Northwestern and in the community. Examples of this include language support, need-based grants. They can also act as advocates for those who aren't as familiar with how these trials work and how to navigate kind of complex medical systems. Spiritual care can also be considered. We have hospital-based chaplains, and they can be used for in and outpatient services. They'll do things like spiritual guidance. They help deal with distress. Ethical concerns can also be dealt with as well, and they are multi-faith. Then we have sponsor-provided compensation. So oftentimes, these clinical trials will often offer modest stipends for food and travel. Think of something like in the range of $50 a day. And these type of things can help patients who have less means or have difficulty reaching clinical trials and have help them gain access to these resources. So with that, I will pass the baton over. And if there are any questions later on, feel free to ask.
Some great information. Thank you for that. We will move on to our next presenter, our next speaker rather. He's an actual patient participant. So you'll get to hear this directly from this experience directly from someone who's actually participated in a clinical trial, and his name is Mann. Mr. Mann, you're up.
Well, thank you very much for having me here this morning. And I'll just go back to the beginning. And in January 1995, I was having back pain and I was having fatigue. And I went to the doctor's office to find out what was going on. And the doctor had done an MRI, and when he came back, the results were that I had something called chronic myeloid leukemia, and the prognosis was 3 years to live. So this was January 1995, and I had 3 years to live. And of course, I went into shock because I had a 5-year-old daughter, and my wife and I, we were teaching her, we did, just right after Christmas, and we still had one training wheel and her little pink bicycle that we were trying to teach her to ride. And, I just, when he told me the words, it was like muffled, and then I looked at the clock, I heard that like a sound, it was like ticking, but it sounded like a drum. And at the time, I was a major in the Army. So, all this was a lot. And then he went on to say that the only possible cure was a bone marrow transplant. And my best chances were finding someone of my same ethnic group. And being a Black American, that year, the previous year, 1994, out of the 2,000 Black Americans who were looking for a donor, only 8 of them found an unrelated donor. If you don't have one in your family, a sibling or sister or blood brother or someone who met, you have to look on the list, and only 8 people were able to look on the list and find someone. So that's another health disparity right there. So the other 1980s, they didn't have good outcomes. So I looked on the list and I couldn't find anyone. So my only outcome, only option that he gave me was to start the current treatment of the interferon, search for a bone marrow donor. Hopefully one donor will come on the list, or do nothing. And do nothing is not, that's not an option. So those are my 2 options. So start taking the interferon, which was an injection every day. Interferon had to stay refrigerated. So I had to take shots in my leg and stomach every day. And I decided I wanted to do bone marrow drives. And they had said, that's might not be a good idea because the patient, has to focus on getting well, and it might take a lot of energy. But nevertheless, I thought I could make a connection with folks by being out there asking for donors myself. So I was fortunate enough, I was in the military, and I traveled around to different bases, and I did bone marrow drives. And then with the civilians, I was able to go to different churches and do bone marrow drives, and also with different fraternities and sororities and any group that I could get together. I'd go to the mall and get people to join, and I had no luck, and it was like thousands and thousands of people that were joining, but I couldn't find a match. So I was living in Michigan at the time, and I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm at today. And I've been here since 1996 because I had to take a medical retirement from the Army because I was unable to deploy and do the work that I needed to do because I had leukemia. And so I was doing a drive down here in Georgia because I kept doing the drives because that was the only thing that could save me. And I did a drive about 2 hours south in a place called Columbus, Georgia. And this white businessman had seen the television promotion that I did. and he came to the drive, and I missed him the first time, so he came back because I was traveling from Atlanta, and he had this sense of duty. He said, "Hey, I had hairy cell leukemia. I had hairy cell leukemia. I was near death, and I went out to MD Anderson in Houston, Texas, to do a clinical trial, and he recommended that I tried the same thing." And of course, the major medical centers are the ones that with the research or whatever. At the time, those are the only ones who were doing the clinical trials. So I got in contact with his doctor, and the doctor said, come on out. So I flew out to MD Anderson, and the doctor looked at my records. And by the way, this is 18 months into my 3 years before anyone who mentioned clinical trials. So actually, when I was diagnosed, I actually had 3 options. I had interferon, I had bone marrow donor, and I had one I didn't know about, was clinical trials. So I flew out to MD Anderson, and the doctor looks at my records. He puts them up, and this is back in 1996, and he's looking at them, and he says, we still have time. I'm going to increase your dose of interferon, and I'm going to put you on clinical trial after clinical trial. So doing all these different combinations of drugs and clinical trials, and they would work for a few months, or they wouldn't stay. I wouldn't, like, my numbers kept going up, but they would go down and up like this, So at the 3-year mark, I was basically, at the same place I was when I started, because I maybe a little bit worse, because I would go to sleep, get like 8 hours of sleep, wake up, drink coffee, and feel like I never went to sleep. So I asked the doctor, because all the drugs by now had failed. And I asked him, I said, "Hey, do you have anything else?" And he said, "Well, we have this one drug that we're working on. It's in the lab, but we're having problems with it with the animals, and in the livers of the animals." And he said, "But if we get approval, you'll be the first to try it." And his nurse said, "Hey, you just told somebody else that." So he said, "Hey, well, you'll be the second person to try it." And so I went back home, and then about 6 months later, 7 months later, July, he called and said, "We got approval to use this in humans." So I flew back out, and I was the second person at MD Anderson to use this drug, which is called Gleevec. And it worked for me. And the other guy did not work for, when you start off a clinical trial, the dose is low to begin with, but the dose was just right for me. And they increased the dose over time, but it worked for me. And 10 months after that, I ran a 26.2 mile marathon in Alaska. And then a few months later, I cycled 111 miles in a cycling event in Tucson, Arizona. And it was another couple years before the drug was actually approved for the general public. But keep in mind that people using this drug, they were dying because this was the drug. It was this, interferon. That was history. And then once this drug was approved, people started to live. And of the hundreds of thousands of people who use this drug, I'm the longest living person in the world. And also this drug has been used for other cancers. And there are different generations of this type of drug. And there are other variations of this drug because it is what they call a TKI, or a kinase inhibitor. So that technology, which the drug goes straight to that cell, targets that cell, leaves the good cells alone, goes to the bad cells, and stops whatever is happening with the bad cell from happening. And that technology is used for so many different types of cancers today that it is, saving millions of lives. And so it was just a good outcome. My daughter, who was 5, and she learned how to ride that bicycle, drive a car. She went on to Harvard College, and she became a medical doctor herself. I advocate for bone marrow donation. I advocate for education awareness. I advocate for clinical trials. What you would call Exhibit A of, it works. 27 years ago, I was sick, but here I am well. And I just thank you. I thank you for having me tell my story.
That was an amazing story. Thank you so much. That was truly amazing, and it's ironic because in 1996 I lost a friend to leukemia, and she passed away. She had 4 kids. They're all adults now, but she got diagnosed, she got ill, and then she was gone, like in less than 6 months. So. Yes. Your story is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. We will move on and have my good friend Rabia speak. He is the person that brought Health for All to CPL. Somebody that I've been working with for a couple of months. Rabia, it's your turn. Take over.
Thank you so much, Angela. I actually have a few questions for Mel, but we'll wait till after. We'll do a definitely get a cut to Q&A. But I also acknowledge Dr. Simon, of course, and my colleague Maggie, who really made this happen with this project, with the Health for All project that we'll show you today. So I'll start actually with. Maggie Nava here was part of the original team that tested out what you see before you here is the healthforallproject.org, which is our website, web-based tool that was built along with Chicago Public Library librarians and patrons who gave their feedback and tested this out and went through a lot of different changes to what you see before you. And it really, what it is that it was built on these principles, basically, that the person who's using the tool needs to be part of the design of the tool. And that's what this is, because we took all the feedback, including, ideas and different ways they use the website to fine tune it to what you see today. So with that, I'm going to actually pass it to my colleague, Maggie, to give a brief overview of the website for Health for All project.
Thank you, Rabia. And thank you, Angela, for inviting us. Mel, that was amazing. And this is why your story is why we do the work that we do. Because you just never know who you're going to touch. And it's just amazing. I was listening to your story and I was like, oh my gosh. I was actually thinking I wish we could, if in the future we could have you as a guest speaker.
Oh, sure. Yeah. just
thank
let
you.
me know. I'd love to. And I'll be up that way for the ESCO conference in May.
Oh, awesome.
Or is it June, that time frame too. Yes.
Thank you. So the website is actually about everything that was spoken about today, from the beginning of Dr. Simon's presentation to Kelly's presentation as well, all the way to Mel's. So it's really, for us, we always start with, we're not recruiting for clinical trials. It's just information that we're providing, just in case you're thinking about clinical trials. And even if you're not thinking about it, this is information that what you like to know. And it's because we do see the importance of diversity in clinical trials. you know, like Dr. Simon started, and then throughout the whole presentations today, we've heard a lot about how these medications react differently on different people. And for the most part, these medications are tested on Caucasian or white individuals. The world as we see right now is not made of all white people. There are our bodies react differently to all types of medication. And so we know the importance of diversity within clinical trials. So what Dr. Simon was saying earlier, it took about 10 years to get to the point to where we are right now. It started off with cards, and then we started to develop this website on what is a clinical trial, why should I trust clinical trials, what are the pros and cons of being in a clinical trial, why does diversity matter in clinical trials, why join a clinical trial if I'm healthy. So all these topics we speak about in this website. And like Rabia alluded, we created the website keeping in mind the audience who we wanted to target. One of my favorite stories when I was going through this process, we started off as just, you know, the team drawing pictures of what do you see when you come in, when you walk into the library? Who is the first person that you see when you walk into the library? Once we got to that point, we're like, well, the first person we see is the librarian as we're walking into the library. So we had to get the librarians input in creating this tool. Once we got that, we started thinking, well, based on their input, we're like, okay, well, we need to get a group of patrons to be a part of this project. We started with focus groups, and there's one particular participant that started with us from the focus groups, and he was very adamant of, I don't want to be anybody's guinea pig. I'm doing this basically because you're paying me to do this. But I would not participate in clinical trials. That was the first focus group. And then we got to the usability testing, and it just so happened that when we were recruiting, he was also there. And the usability testing, we had people were observing the patron on how and where he was going with the mouse on the computer. When we were asking him, can you please show me, or them, can you please show me where you would go if you want to know about clinical trials, why clinical trials, diversity matters in clinical trials. Can you please show me with your mouse where you would go if you wanted definitions on a certain terminology. And then on the third one, we finally presented the website that's right here. And the same individual, again, was there. And he said, you know, being engaged in all this process, you have made me a believer. I have thought about what you have said and why you're doing this. And I will actually move forward in thinking that, you know, if the time comes, or if I'm ever asked to be part of a clinical trial, I'll do it. And for me, from going to, I don't want to be anybody's guinea pig, to, you know what, I think you're right, and we do need diversity in clinical trials, for me was a big, huge win. And so that's what the website is about, is just providing information and getting you to think about why we need diversity in clinical trials. And I know we're running out of time, so I'm going to take it to Rabia.
Great, thank you, Maggie. And also, yeah, so that was really, as Maggie illustrated, this is how this came to be as a website. And again, the website is healthforallproject.org. And you can see as some of these pages are created, and there are short snippets of information. These questions really came up organically from the participants themselves. So they're not just, they are frequently asked questions, but they're also questions that are directly tied to all those things that we talked about earlier, Dr. Simon talked about with mistrust, and that's really addressing it head on here and going through the different topics. You could see that take place. So because of the development of this Health for All project, we also had the opportunity to extend it and build upon it with health and preventive services, which is this next website, navigatingwellness.org. So Navigating Wellness, this is what you're looking at as the first draft, so to speak. We are currently underway doing some usability testing, much like we did with the previous web-based tool. But in this case, it's focused on how we can connect all the information out there on preventive services, so things you should be doing with your doctor to stay healthy and also prevent disease. And there is an organization that is called the United States Preventive Services Task Force, and their purpose is to they're all experts, including one with us today, Dr. Simon, who served on the task force, to develop recommendations and really give them a grade from A, B, C to so on. But the A and B recommendations are those that every person of a certain age, based on your age, based on your body mass index, which is what you see here with the different information you can put in. Then it tells you, as if you're a 45-year-old male who is a smoker, here's the things you should be doing to see your doctor. You should go do this screening for cancer, for lung cancer, or you should be checking your blood pressure. All these things that are part of staying healthy and based on evidence-based information that is used. So again, this is a first draft, and we're really excited to begin this testing and begin developing more, we call them prototypes, or like next versions of this website that'll make it a lot more user-based, based on the Chicago Public Library patrons who will be testing it. And again, it's also part of this, the goal of this project is to connect people to community resources, which we all know is a difficult thing when we're trying to find a specific help, or especially when it comes to health and resources. And as you could see, when it comes to clinic connections or things when it comes to mental health resources, all these things are that as we've come to know libraries to serve, they provide these types of resources. We have social workers in libraries in Chicago now helping out with these types of resources. So it makes sense that we supplement that and we provide another tool that both librarians and their patrons can use. Also, it was exciting. We received a supplement, which is basically like a little bonus with this project, where we had to build a project called Well Mama, which is focused on maternal health, and it is called the Well Mama module. And this is this tool, and it is well-mama.org, and you can get to it from the previous website. So this was created very specifically to address the disparities in maternal health. And we got to do a couple of fun things. One, we got to do a few podcast episodes that looked at the talking to different experts in the field and community leaders, people like who work as doulas or provide breastfeeding support, talking about policy as well, about what things can be done to help improve maternal health. And that's this page you see here. Again, this is also another first draft, and we're excited to share this with our mothers and mothers-to-be, or anyone really who's involved in taking care of a woman who's giving birth anytime soon. And this is information that is also sourced to expert and evidence-based information. But really what the important part of this is that there is information all out there, but the important thing is how can we bridge the connection to those who may not be used to seeing this kind of information, making it as understandable and accessible as possible, so that they can take it and help it with their support systems and with their families. And that's our website. So we're excited to continue the partnership with Chicago Public Libraries, and also to make improvements on this. For those who are interested, And we do need your help, especially those who are viewing this page. Please visit us at navigatingwellness.org. That's this website here. And you'll get to sign up. There's on the top here, a banner where you can join a study to be part of our group, who will be the first group of people who will be testing this website and giving some information. So please do visit us at the website and sign up with your name and email, and we'll get in touch with you with our research team. Thank you so much. I did get a chat here from Beverly about asking about how we get past the decades of mistrust that African Americans and other ethnic groups have toward clinical testing. Not everyone will come in to get the stipend that is offered. That's a very important point, Beverly. And with our project specifically, I'll just mention that we're not doing interventions or testing, but we did talk previously, especially hearing from Mel, about being involved in a clinical trial and the risks and benefits. I mean, that's really like one of the, I think, strongest challenges. And I think, Angela, so I think I just to wrap up, that's what we wanted to show you with our websites, but I'd love to actually bring it back and see if perhaps Mel has a perspective on this, how he overcame personally that challenge of getting over or just confronting that, really, and how you felt at the time, because I'm sure it was a difficult time.
Well, there's two sides of that coin, and one side is the bias that's built in at the beginning. If you think that the Black Americans will be distrustful or won't join a clinical trial, then you may not ask, because there's this chatter that's saying that they won't join. So that's, I was not asked. But I think the one of the biggest things is that everyone should be asked. That should be an option. And then you might look at the research and it may say that if you ask, then you would get a better response. And then, of course, there is distrust, with, the Tuskegee incident, the Dr. Sims and his experimentation on the enslaved females, the Henrietta Lacks, all that history. But you have to keep in mind, you don't want to lose, you lose out you lost out on the front end. You don't want to lose out on the other end with the research. You want, what saved me was tomorrow's research. I was able to get that today, and then I go back to my support group and other folks, and they would look at me and compare my numbers, because facts are facts. I'm doing well, you're not doing well. So the facts are facts. So that's another thing to look at, and it's all like an individual thing. So you put it out there, you put out the different options, you put the information out. This is really good. What Northwestern is doing and the Chicago Public Library is doing, and it just it's probably the best I've seen. As far as information and the different tools and integration of different systems and what the whole thing is great. And you just have to keep pegging away. And one thing that has stopped African Americans is the cost of clinical trials, because I had to keep in mind, I flew from Atlanta to Houston, and I had to do that every 3 months. And sometimes I would have to stay out there for 3 months, find a place to live with my own money, transportation. Some people can't stay away from work that long, or childcare, or, all that stuff. So what's happening now is the thought of bringing the clinical trials to the people, and decentralize them and make them more accessible, and giving the stipends, because what I did, a lot of people couldn't do. And I had great insurance and whatever, and I had the means to do it. And so that's something to keep in mind. There was another thing I had thought about on trying to see, but just make it more affordable, and get it out there early, because a lot of things is the eligibility too, that I think what might have been talked about earlier with Dr. Simon, is, you want to get on these clinical trials early too, because if you don't, one drug might have worked for you, but now you have to use several drugs because you got in late, or you may not even qualify to get in the clinical trial that may have saved your life. And you're not always coming in phase 1. You may be coming in phase 2 or 3. Everybody thinks, hey, I'm the first person, but you could be like 3 or 4 years coming in. But the thing is going to help you. And then you look at quality of life. One trial I was on that was for PEG interferon, was that instead of taking the shot every day, I would take it once a week, which was better because I didn't have to refrigerate it. I could just take my shot and then not think about it for a week. So there's all different combinations of help and things that will apply to different individuals. And every drug that we take had to go through a clinical trial. And like I said, these kinase inhibitors, I was just reading Henrietta Lack's book yesterday, and it was mentioned in there that these kinase inhibitors, a lot of research came from those HeLoC cells. So hey, I'm gonna take advantage of that. I'm gonna be part of that and not be a double loser. I want today's knowledge now.
I'm sorry. Can I ask you a question? You mentioned qualifying for a clinical trial. What does it take to qualify? I mean, what?
Oh, I'll probably let Dr. Simon talk about maybe some of the different eligibilities, because like for me, my qualification was actually I had no other thing worked as far as interferon. You had to fail interferon. So they could compare how well you did, people did with the new drug versus the old drug.
Okay, Dr. Simon.
Sure, I'm happy to take the baton from Mel for a few moments. But Mel is an expert. I really appreciate that story. And Beverly, your question is super critical. So I did address a little bit about it earlier, I think before you logged on, but I just want to frame it real quick, and then I'll transition to that question. We have earned the distrust of people. We meaning the scientists, the physicians, the healthcare clinicians in healthcare delivery and in research. And we have to work super, super hard to get that trust back. And I hope you can be assured that there are people, not me included, that are working across the world and specifically this country to really push investigators and research teams and clinical trial, people who create these clinical trials, to really be introspective about their own biases, but also about the research and the way they're creating certain protocols and making sure that those protocols and those clinical trial and those research questions all really do have in mind who bears the brunt of the diseases in this country and in this world, which populations have been traditionally excluded from participating in research or excluded from getting access to the state of the art and the state of cancer treatment or clinical trial participation or any of these things. And so we're really pushing and helping people to learn how to better create trials that have inclusion criteria, which is what this question is, that are more inclusive, and to be mindful of learning how to better target science and treatments that will actually make a difference for everybody and not just for some versus others. So so to address your question, clinical trial criteria, like ways to get enrolled, vary from clinical trial to clinical trial. So it's not just one thing, right? So there's a lot of different, what we call inclusion criteria, which means you can get into a clinical trial or you can be eligible for a particular clinical trial based on X, Y, and Z. And so really what it takes is a conversation with the clinical trial leader or so say you go to a cancer center and you ask your doctor, are there clinical trials that I am eligible to be put on? And that's a really important question. It's a fair game question. If you have a particular disease, and I'm going to stick with cancer since it's the one that has the most clinical trials around it. If you come to a cancer center to ask as a new patient, or just you go to this cancer center to have a second opinion about a particular cancer that you have or that your loved one has, you have every right to ask the critical question, is there a clinical trial that I'm eligible for, or that my loved one is eligible for? And you should ask that question because not everybody yet is automatically considering clinical trials for every single patient equally. And so because that still exists in this country, this differential, it's really important that you bridge that question. Now, when you talk to someone like Kelly, who is a wonderful clinical trial coordinator at our cancer center, you start to talk about what are the criteria that would make me eligible for this trial. Right. So all of those questions are fair game and you should be asking them because that's what helps drive your clinical care team to take better care of you.
And one more point I would like to make is that when you're on a clinical trial, it's not like I'm getting this medicine or I am getting a placebo, a sugar pill. It's not that. I'm getting this new medicine, or I'm at least getting what the standard of care is, because it would be unethical to give you a sugar pill or something of that nature. So it's not like you are getting lesser treatment, and you are seeing a doctor more often than you would see the doctor normally, because there are certain protocol that calls for you to go and be tested more to see the side effects and the efficacy of the new drug. So it's not being a guinea pig. It's being a tool to help other folks also. So that's a valid part. And there is unconscious bias. There's unconscious bias and bias in regular medicine with how Blacks do not feel pain, and Blacks are this and Blacks are that. And it takes education of the medical professionals. You have to keep educating even the medical staff, because how you walk into a doctor's office and how even the front desk reacts can leave a bad impression. So it's just a constant education of everyone involved, and also to make Blacks more informed, and they can be better advocates for themselves.
Those are actually really great points. Thank you for bringing that up, because we do know that there have been stories where you've heard that, oh, well, you just take a placebo, and it's like, well, if you're taking a sugar pill, what's the point?
Right.
How does it benefit me? What are we actually testing? Okay, we have a question. Kelly, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Question or comment?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Not so much a question, more so a part of a more holistic answer that both Mel and Dr. Simon have provided. As far as the considerations of, how do we overcome the distrust that has, occurred in research and in medicine in general, I think it's important for us to also remember that with Tuskegee, the unethical aspect of that research was that they withheld medication. they withheld treatment. They refused access to people who otherwise could have been cured. And in context of where we are today, it's important that we ourselves, while we're always skeptical and we're always aware and hypervigilant, as Dr. Simon mentioned, we earn the distrust in the medical field. It's important for patients to not close doors that could otherwise be open, because that in and of itself is a form of, I don't want to say discrimination, but it's a form of reduced care or reduced access to care and reduced access to the best possible care. So that's one little consideration that I always like to remind people of. And then another thing is with regard to how do you know if you're eligible for a study? And every study has a very specific protocol with inclusion and exclusion criteria. But in addition to that, I did mention the clinicaltrial.gov, and I was wondering if maybe I could share my screen and kind of show you kind of an example of how you could look up a trial. So I'm going to share my screen. I have it opened in another browser here. Let's see if that works. Okay, looks like everyone can see that. Okay, so I'm just going to put in as an example myeloma. Okay, I'm going to search the disease. And then obviously I can put in the country that I'm in, United States. And then other terms too, if that should apply. Okay. Now, you see a bunch of trials that come up here, but to further refine it, I can put in different demographics. Now, the important part here is that a lot of these trials will use these demographics in order to screen patients. And so some of the inclusion criteria might be that you have to be over 65, you might be under 65, or if you're under 65, you have to meet different criteria. So, you know, you put in some of this information and you put in your gender, accepts healthy volunteers, et cetera. And then you apply these different search parameters, and then you can help kind of narrow down the trials. You can see all up and down the side, it will mention whether or not they're actively recruiting right now. And then the last little point that I want to mention is that with regard to the placebo medication, Mel kind of hit the nail on the head with this. You'll always know whether or not you're in a placebo trial or not. So there would never be a situation where you need treatment for cancer and you wouldn't know if you're in a placebo-controlled trial or not. And normally when it comes to something like cancer, they wouldn't put you in a placebo-controlled trial because it wouldn't be ethical if there's active available treatments out there for you. So these are just some of the considerations, really good questions, but things to consider when deciding on whether or not to participate in a clinical trial.
Thank you for that follow-up information, Kelly. Does anyone have any questions? We can open it up for Q&A now. Feel free to type it in chat, raise your hand, or unmute yourself.
I can take the question that's in the chat from Shirley. Shirley is asking that they send, at Northwestern, we send clinical trial invitations constantly. And does that mean that a patient has to go through the process or to get into the trial, or does a patient automatically be placed in a trial? And Shirley, a patient is never automatically placed in a clinical trial. It's you have to, as a patient, consent to sign forms and go through all of that, the process of learning about the clinical trial and all the benefits and risks of the clinical trial before you get placed on a clinical trial. We never, ever, ever can put a patient on a research study or a clinical trial of any sort without asking. We must ask permission, even if we're just collecting specimens. So say you're coming to our cancer center or our hospital and you're having a surgery, for example, on a particular body part, and they're removing some tissue. We often will ask if you're willing to donate whatever tissue is left over after the pathologist and team examine the tissue and make sure it's okay, and give you all the treatments that you need if it's a cancer and all that stuff. There's often extra tissue that could be used for research. We even have to get your consent to use that. So we can never experiment on you or put you through a trial in any way, shape, or form, or use your cells like Henrietta Lacks's cells were taken from her without her permission back in the day. We can't do that anymore. And so it's really important, if you want to be a part of a clinical trial, that you ask for that opportunity. We as physicians should be constantly looking for possible clinical trials that you could be put on, and introduce those to you as options. But again, it's really important that you also ask, because that's your chance to also take control of your own care, which is, I think, a very important point. And Mel, I think, emphasized that as well.
I keep forgetting that I'm muted. Thank you so much, Dr. Simon. Anyone else have any other questions that they'd like to ask our panelists before we wrap up? I thought I saw a hand. Beverly, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. Very, very informative program. Just 2 points. I do remember being asked for the tissue and stuff for whenever you're having a procedure. And that's kind of automatic because you want to help. But I will say that very few people, unless they're in Mr. Mel's case, thinks in terms of clinical trial if they're already in the midst of going through treatment for whether it's cancer or myeloma or sarcoidosis or anything else. You're so focused emotionally and mentally and physically on the things that you have to do to get through the process of healing that I think very few people think in terms of getting involved into the clinical. So I'm wondering, and I heard you say that people are supposed to ask, but I doubt that a lot of people realize that they're supposed to ask. And so that's another area of ignorance, not in the negative term, but just not knowing, that's out there in the public. And so even after you've gone through treatment, is it even worth asking people, asking the Northwestern or University of Chicago, whatever hospital you're near, if they need you for a clinical trial, if you've already finished your treatment or you halfway through your treatment?
My mantra is never give up. Beverly, that is such a good point. You never give up, right? And there are, even if you finish your treatment and it recurs or it metastasizes or something like that, or there's a new preventive therapy to prolong your life, or there's other trials, like there's exercise trials, there's nutrition trials, there's things to help improve quality of life as well. It's not all about drugs or treatments or surgeries. And so the trials that are available out there, especially in the United States and including Chicagoland area, are vast. So never give up asking if there's something else I can do. And people like me are pushing physicians and clinicians and clinical care teams across the country to ask those questions too, right? The onus, I believe, is on the healthcare team to avail clinical trials to patients. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we've emphasized that you can bring the question up. And no question is not fair game. All questions are fair game, right? And you'd be surprised at some of the lists of questions that I get beyond clinical trials. Like people come in prepped, having searched the internet, and there's a lot of good information on the internet, but there's also a lot of misinformation on the internet. So I, as a physician, would rather hear questions and then for you to not ask. But it's also, I feel it's on me as well to offer, but not every clinician is the same, right? Just like not every patient is the same. So that's why we're doing this program, so that we can get the word out more, that the onus is, for sure on the healthcare team to avail you all of opportunities and options for treatments and et cetera and trials, but also we want you to ask too. It's really important.
So I have a question. What if because we're dealing with Northwestern, if you're not a patient of Northwestern, are you still able to participate in a clinical trial?
For sure. You can, it's important to understand that you can get a second opinion, right? You can come to Northwestern and get a second opinion. You could then, during that second opinion or first opinion, if you come as a new patient, either one, or a third opinion, fourth, fifth opinion, and ask those questions around clinical trial eligibility, for sure. I mean, that's not the only question that you come in asking, of course, right, but it is an option.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that.
And that goes that goes for other medical centers too. Same thing. You can go to University of Chicago or Rush or other hospitals. If people are looking at this outside of Chicago, you can ask for another opinion.
Okay. Any other questions?
I just want to also say that this is such a great time also for research. And a couple of weeks ago, the president announced the Moonshot Initiative, the restart of that. And there are just so many hundreds of $1 million that are put towards research, future research, to cut cancer in half by 50% in the next 25 years. And that's going to track with the cycle, the demography that Dr. Simon talked about. So, even though you are on a drug, like I'm on a drug, there are like drugs that are better than the one that I am on. I'm not using that drug because don't want to rock the boat, but there's so many new things coming out, and research is the way of the future, and it will cut cancer by a significant amount.
That's awesome. Any other questions for our panelists?
While we're waiting for more questions, I just want to give a plug, because something happened during COVID to all of us with respect to just, getting regular care, let alone cancer care or any other care. And so whoever's viewing this, I highly encourage, it's okay if you stepped off the boat with respect to your health over the last 2 years. It's normal. A lot of people did it, but please come back in. Please do this for yourself, because you need to be healthy for yourself so that you can care for everybody else and all your loved ones around you. And so if there was like a cancer screen that you didn't do or something that you didn't follow up on, there's no shame. We aren't going to shame you in this healthcare, on our healthcare teams. We want you to come back no matter how late you are for it, no matter what it is. So come back into care. That's a really important point.
And I'd like to say something. Northwestern has been our hospital for many, many years. They saved my mother for many, many years. We lost her last year, but there was we were okay with it, because we knew that she was saved for a long time. And I must say, I have an excellent physician, and he makes sure, even in COVID, that we did everything we needed to do. And that means he will call you up at 2 a.m. and bug you. So I am grateful to Northwestern. I'm grateful to this panel. And I wish I had got on earlier, but I'm at work and I had to do some things and I didn't want Angela to want to beat me up. So I am grateful. This is excellent. And thank you very much, all of you.
This truly was a great panel. We are going to try to do this again. I'm going to see if I can get you guys back in to speak to our patrons, even if you know, probably sometime during the summer, and hopefully maybe we can have, in addition to Mr. Manning, someone else who's participated in a clinical trial, although his story is truly amazing and inspiring. But if no one else has any other questions, that is our program for today. I really appreciate everyone participating. I appreciate all of my panelists. You guys did an amazing job. You have no idea how much I appreciate this. And with that, we're going to end the program for today. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you for hosting me.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.